Hello, my name is Shane Coughlin, and I'm the General Manager of the OpenChain project at the Linux Foundation. Thank you very much for having me speak at your conference, and I do hope that you will find today's talk useful and informative. The first thing I would like to do is to thank OpenAtom and everyone involved in this conference for creating space to discuss something as important as standards for open source license compliance and open source security assurance. Now, today I'm going to specifically talk about the OpenChain project, and we create and maintain standards for open source licensing and security. The reason we do this is because the global supply chain is not quite as organized as people think. Instead of looking like a nice tidy sequence of straight arrows, it looks a little bit more like this. There's quite a lot of chaos out there. The numbers are clear. Over 60% of managers are monitoring the supply chain in Excel spreadsheets. And over 94% of companies don't have full visibility into how their supply chain works. Open source is not unique. It is everywhere. In most industries, 100% of code bases use open source. And in the industries where we find the least open source, it's still 93% of those code bases. Unfortunately, over half of the code bases have license compliance issues, and over 80% have security issues. This isn't a problem specific to open source, but we're talking about open source today, so we're going to talk about how to address that. Now, it's important to understand that while there are problems in the supply chain, companies know that there shouldn't be. 40% of costs of managing the supply chain can be reduced with better optimization. Over half of companies see good supply chain management as a competitive edge. 70% of companies know that the supply chain working efficiently helps customer service. So there is a problem in the supply chain, but companies know they will save money, get better results, and have happier customers if they can fix it. When it comes to open source, license compliance and security assurance is a key part of supply chain management. Improving this improves the supply chain for everyone. Companies from around the world came together to work on license compliance and security assurance for open source. On this slide, you can see the companies involved in the governing board of the OpenChain project, of my project. Companies from all over the world, from all different industries. In China, we're very lucky to have Honor, Huawei, and Oppo on our board. And we continually expand. For example, Volkswagen just joined our board through their software company, Cariad. Our member companies, our board members, represent over 5.9 trillion US dollars in market value. But they are only a small part of OpenChain. They are only a small part of the companies working on making the supply chain better. We have global work groups, global special interest groups, and regional user groups in various countries, regions, and territories. Everywhere, people are collaborating to make the supply chain better. Here is an example of the verticals impacted by the OpenChain project. This is just companies that have announced OpenChain conformance through our website, and of course our board members. As you can see, we touch on virtually every major industry. The companies in that snapshot represent over $5 trillion. In fact, the true number is well north of $7.5 trillion. And they are just a small number of the companies deeply involved in the OpenChain project, working on open source supply chain for licensing and security. Here are example companies from a few of our community mailing lists. As you can see, companies from all over the world and all types of industry are working together. I put Lockheed Martin in the center because Chris Wood, a senior fellow at Lockheed Martin, is a co-chair of our specification development. We are an open source project. People don't have to be on our board to have leadership roles in what we do. There are over 1,000 companies in the OpenChain ecosystem, and in China we're quite big too. We have over 260 people in our China WeChat community group. Now, specifically, what we do to make the open source supply chain better for license compliance and security assurance is we build standards. We build high-level process standards that are very simple but effective for companies of any size in different markets. And we develop them, as I said, in an open source way. Our community creates, maintains, and improves these standards. We have two standards in market. One, ISO IEC 5230, is the international standard for open source license compliance. The other, ISO IEC DIS 18974, is an industry standard, it's in the market already, which is becoming an ISO standard sometime this year. Now, our standards work company by company. Basically, they say have some key processes inbound, have internal training, policy, and process, and have some key processes outbound. As company by company across the supply chain begin using these standards, we get a more predictable, more trusted supply chain, and that benefits everyone. Using our standards is also very simple. People can self-certify. They can get independent assessment to help with their self-certification. Or they can get third-party certification from an official certifier. This freedom of choice makes it really easy for companies to get started. And, of course, we like to support people with a lot of reference material. For example, we have free self-certification checklists and questionnaires available on our website. If you can answer yes to every question, you meet the requirements of our standard. If you answer no to some questions, you know where to invest a little bit extra resources to improve your open source compliance or your open source security management. Now, I want to give you some actual news items about our standards. Let's be practical about what's happening. First, ISO IEC 5230, the International Standard for Open Source License Compliance. On our website, we have 98 organizations listed with conformant programs. They have adopted our standard and are using it for an OpenChain conformant program. Now, these 98 companies are just a sample. These are the companies that came to us and said, please add us to your website. On this slide, you can see some of the recent organizations to announce adoption of our standard for license compliance. Quite a few Chinese companies have done this in the last month. You can see Alibaba Cloud, ByteDance, China Mobile, and Z1 from SAIC Motors, all adopting the standard for OpenChain ISO IEC 5230 conformant programs. Other companies, like Socionext in Japan, have also announced in the last month that they're using the standard. The actual company numbers using this standard are hard to guess, because of course an ISO standard is usually used in something like company-to-company communication. But we have some idea that the total numbers are very high. For example, PwC did a survey in 2001, and it indicated that 20% of companies in Germany with more than 2,000 employees were already using our standard for open source license compliance. Now, how about our standard for security assurance? This is much newer. It came to the market around the end of last year. It already has momentum, though. It's an industry standard today, and it will become an ISO standard in the next few months. We actually expect to complete the main ISO process at the end of June. And after that, there will be an editorial period of around a month, in which case we are likely to have the ISO number for this standard in July. Before we get that ISO number, the standard is available and is being used. The most recent company to announce adoption was LG Electronics, announcing they have an OpenChain security assurance conformant program. They join companies like BlackBerry in Canada and Interneuron in the United Kingdom in using this standard already. Now, our project has a lot more happening than just the standards. To support people adopting the standards, we tell people a lot about them. We have a lot of reference material of different types, and we have been updating it recently. For example, updating our one-page and one-slide overviews so people get a quick snapshot of what we do. We have been improving our ways for people to engage. For example, making it super easy and quick to see what calls and meetings we're having each month. And of course, those listings contain all the information you need to join. Everyone is always welcome. We have a huge reference library, over 1,000 documents to help people use our standards, to educate their staff, to educate their suppliers, and more generally, just to manage things like compliance. This reference library is free for everyone to use, and in fact, the material is usually licensed in a way that in America they would call effectively public domain. You can take it and do anything you want with it. Our purpose is to give educational material to the whole world to improve open source license compliance and open source security. We also are releasing a lot of very practical information. For example, GPL compliance flowcharts. We've had them available for a while, but we're improving them and making it far easier to take and edit them and include them in your material. We've seen a lot of companies taking our reference material. For example, we made an online training course, and that course is being used by companies like Continental, Bosch, and KPMG for teaching their developers. We're delighted to see that. Even if a company is not announcing conformance to one of our standards, using this material makes it a lot easier to improve the general state of the market. Education is always a benefit. We have an enormous webinar program. We started in April 2020 during the difficult time with COVID-19. Our webinar program has become one of the largest in the world, related to open source. We recently released our 51st webinar on software management, a particular project hosted at the OSI Open Source Initiative called Clearly Defined. All of our webinars are free to attend live and, of course, free to watch. We are at so many events. I go to very many, and sometimes I prepare speeches like this one, but we also have lots of partners and friends talking about us. Recently, for example, at the Oscar conference and at the China Automotive Cybersecurity and Data Conference. We try to make sure that as many people as possible know about our standards and can use them. For the long term, we're also working to include information about our standards in publications, like the Journal of Software here in China, and international publications like IAM. And there is so much more. We bring you other specifications in various ways. For example, a specification focused on reusing software as CC0, or effectively public domain. Badges to make it easier to understand when companies have a conformant program to one of our standards. Every month, we release dozens of news items as we make progress to help support people around the world. We also never stop building. Right now, we're editing the next generation of the licensing and security standards. Everyone is invited to be part of that through our calls, through GitHub, and our mailing lists. All of our standards work is done on GitHub. You can open issues, you can see the different versions of the drafts, and you can be a real part of bringing the standards to market. You're very welcome to join our meetings, we have 2 per month, and to contribute to our work. We're also working to help people include the standards more easily in procurement. For example, companies have asked for help with thinking about procurement discussions. So we're making model language for things like procurement negotiation and contracts. We're not giving people official language, just examples. But the idea here is that your lawyers can more easily understand options for including our standards in customer and supplier relationships. We want companies to be able to work together on these standards easily. There is a big commercial ecosystem around our project too. For example, we have 11 official third-party certifiers. We have 27 official service providers, consultancies, and similar. We have 22 official legal providers. And we have 12 official tooling vendors around the world. So there's a huge commercial support ecosystem around these standards, as well as our volunteer community. This is a big project with a big community, and of course, plenty of support. We would like you to be part of it. We would like you to adopt our standards, or at least look at our material and take anything that's useful. We would love for your participation on our calls, making material, building our standards' future versions, and simply sharing ideas or asking questions. Everyone is welcome. You don't have to be a Linux Foundation member. You don't have to contribute anything if you don't want. All you do is turn up. We are a genuine open source project, and we love working with you. China is so important to us, and I'm so grateful for a chance to explain our work to you today. Thank you for your time.